Chapter 1. The Night I Felt Erased. On New Year's Eve, in a room full of people who had known me for years, I realized something terrifying. I was being erased, not yelled at, not divorced, just quietly removed. My name was missing from the paperwork, my access to our money was gone. My husband said it was handled. His mother said she was protecting the family. And my 16-year-old daughter was the only one brave enough to ask, "Mom, why didn't they include you?" This is not a story about shouting or revenge. It's about how silence, signatures, and polite smiles can take your life apart, and how I stopped disappearing. I'm Mackie McNain, and this is the moment everything changed. I did not understand what it meant to be erased until I watched it happen in a room full of people who had known my name for more than a decade. On New Year's Eve of 2023, the suburbs north of Philadelphia were wrapped in that clean, bright cold that makes every porch light look sharper and every window glow like a promise. Our street was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from families who plan their evenings weeks in advance and leave nothing to chance. I had spent the afternoon doing what I always did. I made the food we were bringing, double-checked Sophie's coat, found the gloves she swore she did not lose, and packed a small gift for my mother-in-law, Diane. My name is Tessa Rowan. I was 42 that winter. I managed compliance and risk for a regional shipping and warehousing company, the kind of job that trains you to notice patterns and read what people do not say. At home, that skill usually sat unused, folded away like an umbrella you do not think you will need. I had been married to Grant Rowan for 13 years. He was 45, charming in a way that made strangers feel chosen. His mother loved that about him. Everyone did. Grant drove, one hand on the wheel, the other tapping at his phone at stoplights. He told me it was work. It was always work. I watched the houses slide past, neat lawns buried under frost, wreaths still hanging on doors, a world clinging to the last of December. Sophie sat behind me, earbuds in, her knee bouncing lightly. She was 16, tall and too perceptive, the kind of girl who could read tension the way other kids read captions. When we pulled up to Diane's house, the driveway was already full. Her home was larger than ours, not obscene, just certain. Everything about it said stability. She opened the door before we reached the steps, lipstick perfect, hair smooth, the same pearl studs she wore to every gathering. She kissed Grant's cheek, then turned to me with a warm expression that never quite became warmth. "Good to see you," she said. She did not ask how I was, not really. She asked it the way you ask a cashier if they are doing okay, polite and pre-planned. Inside, the house smelled like cedar and roasted meat. The living room glittered with silver decor and a tree that looked professionally arranged. Diane's husband, Frank, lifted a glass from his armchair and nodded, the kind of gesture that carried the weight of approval without spending a word. Grant immediately drifted toward the men near the fireplace, laughing at something I did not hear. It was the same every time. Grant entered as if the room belonged to him, and I entered as if I was responsible for keeping the room running. I set the food on the kitchen island and smoothed my sweater, checking my reflection in the dark microwave door. I looked like I always did, put together, capable, a woman who could be trusted with forms and deadlines and other people's chaos. Diane appeared at my elbow with a tray of champagne flutes. "You can take these in," she said, then turned away before I could answer. Sophie came into the kitchen behind me, pulling off her coat. She looked around, then lowered her voice. "Mom," she said, "why is it always like this?" "Like what?" I asked, though I knew. She lifted her chin toward the living room. "Your dad gets a parade and you get homework." I gave her a look that was half warning, half apology. She rolled her eyes the way teenagers do, but she stayed close. When I stepped back into the living room with the drinks, the conversations were already layered. Overlapping voices, easy laughter, the clink of ice. Diane's sister was there and two couples I recognized from their church. Someone had the game on mute in the corner, but no one was watching. They were watching each other. Posture, jewelry, the casual way they said the name of a resort like it was a neighbor. Grant was standing near the fireplace with Diane and a man I did not recognize. The man wore a navy suit that looked too sharp for a house party. He held his drink like he was used to holding negotiations. Diane touched Grant's arm lightly. Her fingers lingered in a way that made my stomach tighten for reasons I could not explain. I walked toward them with the tray. Grant glanced at me and smiled, quick, bright, then turned back to the conversation as if my presence had already been accounted for. The man in the navy suit said something about year-end, and Diane laughed softly. "Well, it's finally done," she said. "The trust paperwork is finally done." Grant nodded. "Good timing," he said. Diane's eyes flicked past me, not to me, past me, like I was a piece of furniture. The man in the suit asked a question, and Grant answered with a kind of confidence I'd only heard when he was speaking to someone he wanted to impress. Diane leaned in, her voice lower, and I caught a phrase that made the air in my lungs feel colder. Authorized signers. It was not a dramatic phrase. It was not a threat. It was just language. But I understood enough to know it was a line drawn somewhere, a line that decided who had access and who did not. I kept walking. I offered the tray. Diane took a flute without looking at my hand. Grant took one too, still smiling, still somewhere else. I drifted toward the edge of the room, telling myself not to be ridiculous. Trust paperwork? Estate planning? Those were things people did. Responsible people. Families with assets and opinions. It didn't have to mean anything about me. Still, my eyes kept scanning, the way they do when something feels off. I saw the hallway table near the entryway, the one Diane decorated with seasonal candles and a framed family photo that never included me unless I was standing far to the side. On the corner of that table was a thin envelope, cream-colored, the kind you don't send unless you want it to look serious. I didn't mean to look, but my gaze landed on it and stayed. Estate planning update. The name beneath it was Grant Rowan, and beneath that, Diane Rowan. No other name. No mine. I felt my face go still, like my muscles had forgotten to react. I stared long enough to make my vision sharpen around the edges, then forced myself to move again, to breathe again, to become normal again. In the kitchen, I rinsed a dish that did not need rinsing. My hands were steady, but my thoughts were not. I tried to recall the last time Grant and I had spoken about anything long-term, anything that mattered more than which grocery store had the better salmon. We had talked about saving for Sophie's college. We had talked about repainting the guest room. We had not talked about trust paperwork. We had not talked about authorized signers. Sophie appeared beside me, silent. She leaned against the counter and watched me like she used to when she was small and I was cooking dinner, waiting for me to turn around and make something feel safe. "They're talking about you," she said. I looked at her. My throat felt tight, not from fear, but from the effort of holding myself together. "Not about me," I said. Sophie's eyes narrowed. "Mom," she said, "they're talking about your life." I did not answer. I turned the faucet off and dried my hand slowly. The silence between us stretched, heavy with things neither of us wanted to say out loud. When we went back into the living room, the countdown was starting. Someone turned the volume up. People gathered closer, phones out, glasses raised. Grant found me as if by instinct, as if he knew what it looked like for a husband to stand beside his wife at midnight. He slipped his arm around my waist. "You okay?" he murmured. I could have asked him then. I could have pointed to the envelope and said, "Why is my name not there?" I could have asked what authorized signers meant and why it sounded like a door closing. Instead, I nodded. "I'm fine," I said, because the truth was, I didn't know what I was accusing him of. I only knew how it felt, like I had been present for years doing the work of being a partner, and somehow, quietly, the room had decided I was optional. 10, 9, 8... Sophie stood on my other side, her hand brushing mine. A small contact, like a reminder. 3, 2, 1. "Happy New Year," the room erupted. Cheers, laughter, glasses clinking. Grant kissed my cheek, quick, then turned and hugged his mother. Diane held him longer than she needed to. I watched their faces, their ease, the way they belonged to each other in a language I wasn't fluent in. Outside, fireworks began to pop in the distance, flashes of color over the dark line of trees. For a moment, everyone moved toward the windows, marveling like they didn't see the same thing every year. I stayed back, my champagne untouched, my smile practiced. Sophie leaned close to my ear, her voice almost lost under the noise. "Mom," she whispered, "why didn't they ask you?" My eyes stung, not with tears, but with something sharper. Recognition, the knowledge that my daughter had seen it too, that I was not imagining it, that the erasing had a witness. I put my hand over hers and squeezed once. "I don't know," I said. And as the fireworks cracked and flared outside, I stood in Diane's living room surrounded by people raising glasses to fresh starts, feeling like the new year had arrived without me. Chapter 2. The Paperwork That Spoke for Them. The first business day of January arrived like a slap, clean and quiet, as if the calendar itself expected me to pretend nothing had shifted. I was back at my desk at Harbor Line Freight Solutions, coffee cooling beside my keyboard, inbox filling the way it always did after a holiday. Compliance does not take time off. Risk does not wait for fireworks. Still, I found myself checking my phone more than usual, not for messages, but for that uneasy feeling I could not name, the one that had followed me home from my mother-in-law's house and slept beside me like a second pillow. That afternoon, I opened our shared banking app during a lull between meetings. It was something I did out of habit, the way you check the stove even after you know you turned it off. The screen loaded, the familiar accounts stacked in a neat list, and then my thumb stopped. One account was missing. It was not a small one. It was the savings account we had used for years, the one we called Sophie's cushion, the one we promised would be there when tuition letters came, when life did what life does. I refreshed once, then again. My stomach tightened as if the room had dropped a few degrees. I told myself it was a glitch. Banks updated systems, apps changed layouts. Rational explanations lined up in my mind like polite guests. I tried to access it directly through the account number I had saved. A message flashed, plain and final. "You do not have permission to view this account." I stared until the words stopped looking like English. When I got home that evening, the mailbox was fuller than usual. Bills, flyers, a glossy postcard from a dental office, and one heavy envelope with the bank logo in the corner. The seal was broken. I stood on the porch for a moment, the cold biting at my fingers, and tried to remember if I had opened it earlier. I had not. I had barely checked the mail that week. Grant usually brought it in, set it on the counter, then drifted away like the mail did not belong to him. Inside, I set the envelope on the kitchen table and walked through the house, listening. Grant was in the living room, television on low, scrolling on his phone. Sophie's bedroom door was closed, music muffled behind it. I picked up the envelope again and stepped into the living room. "Did you open this?" I asked. Grant looked up, expression smooth. "Yeah, it was just bank stuff." "Just bank stuff," I repeated, keeping my voice calm. He shrugged. "It came addressed to both of us. I figured you did not need to deal with it." I sat on the edge of the armchair, not fully committing to the moment. My hands were steady, but I could feel something in my chest start to press outward, slow and dangerous. "I tried to log into the savings account today," I said. "It's not showing up." Grant blinked once, then returned his gaze to the phone. "It's handled." "Handled how?" He exhaled like I had asked him to explain the weather. "It's a restructuring thing. We moved some funds around for tax reasons. It's cleaner." "Cleaner for who?" "For us, Tessa, for your peace of mind." There it was, the phrase he used the way he used so many things lately, as if my mind was an unreliable appliance and he was doing me a favor by unplugging it. "My peace of mind would involve knowing where our money is," I said. Grant's mouth tightened. "You're overthinking this."
I felt heat rise behind my eyes. Not tears, not yet, just the start of something that could become them. Overthinking. That word had become a soft muzzle in our house. It meant stop asking. It meant you are being difficult. It meant your discomfort is the problem, not what caused it. I swallowed. I want access restored. Grant's tone stayed gentle, which somehow made it worse. It's temporary. You do not need to stress about it. I'm taking care of things. I stared at him, this man I had built a life with, and tried to find the moment where I stopped being part of the taking care of things. Sophie appeared in the doorway, drawn to the tension like a magnet. She didn't say anything, she just watched. Her eyes moved between us, sharp and quiet. Grant noticed her and softened his voice. "Hey, kiddo," he said. "Everything is fine." Sophie looked at him the way she looked at teachers she didn't trust. Then she looked at me. "Mom," she said quietly, "do you want me to go upstairs?" I shook my head once. "It's okay, Soph." Grant stood, stretching as if this conversation was an inconvenience he could shake out of his shoulders. "I'll talk to you later," he said, "when you're all keyed up." Keyed up, like I was a problem to be managed. He walked past Sophie and kissed her forehead, then disappeared into the hallway. I sat still, holding the opened envelope in my lap, feeling like I was holding a piece of evidence at a crime scene no one else would acknowledge. That night, after Sophie went to bed, I spread the papers across the kitchen table. Account updates, disclosure language, a mention of beneficiary designations, and a reference to an estate planning review completed in late 2019. Late 2019. I could picture that year in a flash. A new supervisor at Harborline, a brutal audit cycle, Sophie starting high school and needing rides and attention, and the kind of steady presence I kept trying to give her. I remembered being tired down to the bone, the kind of tired that makes you sign things just to get through the day. I looked at the signature line on one form. My name was there, my handwriting, my signature, clean and familiar. I didn't remember signing it. Not the moment, not the conversation, not the explanation. I heard Grant's voice in my head, low and reassuring. "It's just paperwork, routine, for the family." My stomach turned. The next morning at work, I closed my office door and called a number I hadn't dialed in years. A financial advisor I once worked with when my father died, and I had to untangle accounts I didn't understand. Her name was Marisol Chen, and her voice still carried that calm precision that made you feel foolish for panicking. "Tessa, Happy New Year. What's going on?" I told her the simplest version. Access removed, envelope opened, trust review, 2019. There was a pause on the line, the kind that meant she was choosing her words carefully. "If there was a trust amendment and you signed, then legally it depends on what you agreed to. Do you have copies of the full documents?" "No," I said, "I have fragments." "Then you need the full set, and you need to know whether you were informed. Consent is not just a signature, it's understanding." Understanding. The word sat heavy. I thanked her and hung up, then sat in my office chair staring at the wall. I should have felt angry. Instead, I felt something worse, a slow grief, as if I was mourning the version of my marriage where questions were welcome. That weekend, Grant insisted we go back to his mother's house for a small family dinner. He called it a reset. Diane called it keeping things close. Frank grilled steaks. Diane lit candles. Everything looked warm, and none of it felt warm. At the table, Diane talked about local news, about a neighbor's renovation, about how people these days did not plan enough for the future. She sliced her steak neatly, then glanced at Grant. "The paperwork is in a good place now," she said. "You did the right thing." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I set it down carefully. "Diane," I said, keeping my voice even, "what paperwork?" Her eyes flicked to Grant. He smiled at her like they shared a pred joke. "Estate planning, practical matters. You know how it is." "I don't," I said, "because no one included me." Diane's face held that same polished composure. "Tessa, you have so much on your plate. Grant is protecting you." I turned to him. Protecting me from what? Knowing my own accounts? Grant's jaw tightened. Not now. Sophie stared at her plate, shoulders tense. I forced myself to breathe. "I can't access our savings account today," I said. "It's not showing up." Grant finally looked at me, his gaze unreadable. "What is your point?" he asked, his voice low and for the first time unsure. "My point is," I replied, her voice shaking, "I want anyone to talk to me about it." Grant's jaw tightened. "You are not listening." "I am listening, I just don't understand why it's okay to shut me out." Suddenly, Frank spoke, his tone heavy. "Tessa, you need to drop this," he said, his eyes on Diane. I froze. The word drop felt like a slap. This man who had sat beside me at countless family dinners, smiled at Sophie's jokes, and talked about the weather or sports, was now using that same tone to shut me down. His heart beat justice in my ears. "I want anyone to talk to me about it." I turned to Grant, his expression hard but still unsure. "Is this really how you want this?" I asked, his voice raw. He did not answer. The silence stretched until the streetlights painted the car in alternating stripes of light and shadow. "You are making this into something it isn't," he said. "It was a reasonable decision. It's done." Done, final, like my voice was an interruption. When we pulled into our driveway, I sat in the car
For a moment before getting out. My hands were cold. My mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. I thought about the envelope already opened, the missing account, Diane speaking for Grant as if she had the right, the way Frank looked away, the way Sophie went quiet. I thought about my signature on a document I did not understand, and the way my own memory had been used against me. I did not feel confused anymore. I felt placed. And in that stillness, I understood something with a certainty that made my chest ache. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a choice they had been making for years, and I had only just started to see it. Chapter 3. Silence but not surrender. Clarity did not feel like relief. It felt like waking up in a house you have lived in for years and realizing the locks were never yours. Monday morning at Harborline Freight Solutions, the office smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner, the usual scent of people pretending they were not exhausted. I arrived early not because I wanted to, but because being home had started to feel like hovering at the edge of a conversation you were not invited into. At work, at least, my badge opened doors. I logged in, checked the queue of compliance tickets, and tried to bury myself in routine. For an hour, it almost worked. Then a calendar invite popped up on my screen, a project kickoff meeting I had been preparing for since October. Port West Integration, a major new partnership, the kind that meant long hours and visibility with senior leadership, the kind of project I had earned. I clicked accept out of muscle memory, then noticed my name was not on the attendee list. I refreshed, thinking it was a glitch the way I had tried to tell myself the bank account was a glitch. The list did not change. Instead, a new email arrived from our operations director, Ron Haskins. He wrote quickly, no greeting, no softness. Due to a potential conflict of interest, compliance will not be leading Port West integration. Another team will cover. My stomach tightened, sharp and familiar. I walked down the hall, past cubicles filled with people chewing on bagels and staring at screens, and knocked on Ron's open door. He looked up, eyebrows raised like I was interrupting something important. I closed the door behind me, which was not my style. My voice stayed steady anyway. "Ron, I just saw the Port West email. My name was removed." He leaned back in his chair. "Yeah, we had to make a call." "What call?" He exhaled through his nose. "Legal flagged something, a potential conflict. I do not have any outside consulting, no board seats, no ownership in our vendors." Ron's eyes flicked to his monitor, then back to me. It's not about you personally. It feels personal. He held up one hand, the gesture managers use when they want you to stop being a person and start being a role. It's about perception, Tessa. We have to protect the company. From what? He hesitated, just long enough to matter. PortWest has ties to a private investment group. Someone in your household might be connected. That's all I can say. My throat went tight. Someone in my household. He didn't say Grant's name, but he didn't have to. I forced myself to breathe. So, because of my husband's connections, I'm sidelined? Ron's shoulders lifted, a small shrug disguised as policy. Temporary. We're just being careful. Careful means removing the person who knows the rules best. His voice softened, not with kindness, with discomfort. Look, I'm not happy about it either, but the decision came from above. Above. The word landed with the same cold finality as done. I left his office without saying anything else because there was nothing left to say that would make me sound like I was pleading. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and stared at the wall behind my monitor as if it might rearrange itself into an explanation I could live with. My phone buzzed. A text from Grant. Long day. Don't start tonight. I did not respond. I looked at my hands instead. They were steady. That was the unsettling part. Something in me had stopped reaching for him. A few minutes later, Vanessa from HR appeared beside my desk holding 2 coffees, the kind that came in cardboard trays when someone knew you might not move for hours. She placed one next to my keyboard and lowered her voice. You got pulled from PortWest. I looked up. Vanessa's eyes were sharp, scanning my face, the way she did when she was reading between policy lines. How do you know? She tilted her head toward the glass offices along the corridor. People talk. Also, Ron looks like he swallowed a screw. I gave a small, tired laugh that barely made it past my throat. They said conflict of interest. Vanessa leaned closer. This is not personal anymore. The words hit harder than I expected, not because I disagreed, but because she said what I had been trying not to think. I kept my eyes on my monitor. Grant is involved, I said. Vanessa's mouth tightened. I don't know details, but I heard PortWest is connected to an investment vehicle, family money, old money, the kind that likes to stay invisible. I thought of Diane's polished smile and the envelope on the hallway table. Estate planning update. Authorized signers. Vanessa watched me for a beat. Tessa, you need to be careful. If they're tying your job to his finances, it's bigger than your marriage. I swallowed. I'm careful. She shook her head slightly. You're quiet. That's not the same thing. After she walked away, I tried to focus. I truly did. I answered emails, reviewed a vendor compliance report, signed off on a warehouse inspection schedule. My work was still clean. My mind was the problem. It kept jumping tracks. PortWest, household connections, above. And then, like a cruel punctuation mark, another email arrived. This one from corporate finance, marked confidential. It mentioned enhanced internal controls and a third-party review of certain transactions related to new partnerships. Not an audit, not yet, but close enough to make my skin prickle. A name appeared in the signature block of the external firm. Gideon Pike, Senior Audit Consultant. The name meant nothing on its own, but the tone of the message did. Cautious, formal, preemptive. The company was bracing for something. So was I. That night, I came home to a house that looked normal from the outside. Lights on, curtains drawn, the smell of dinner in the air. Grant was at the stove, stirring something with the confidence of a man who believed food could smooth over anything. Sophie sat at the kitchen island, homework open, eyes moving between her notebook and her father. When I walked in, she looked up and immediately read my face. Grant did not. Hey, he said, cheerful. I made pasta. We can sit down like normal people. I set my bag on the chair and held his gaze. I was removed from a major project today because of a conflict tied to our household. The spoon paused in his hand, just a fraction. Then he returned to stirring. That's corporate paranoia, he said. They named it. They said it's connected to an investment group tied to PortWest.
Grant's shoulders lifted and fell. Tessa, you don't need to drag work into this. Sophie's pencil stopped. She didn't look down anymore. I kept my voice low. You dragged it into work when you made decisions that put my name in the wrong proximity. Grant turned, leaning against the counter like he was about to talk sense into a child. You're doing it again. You're taking separate things and turning them into a story. It's not a story, I said. It's my life. His expression hardened, still polite, still controlled. If your company is overreacting, that's their issue, not mine. My hands curled against the edge of the chair. I could feel anger rising, but beneath it was something worse. Grief at how easily he could dismiss the consequences on my side of the line. Sophie spoke before I could. If you did nothing wrong, why are you so scared of Mom asking questions? Grant looked at her as if she had spoken in another language. Sophie, he warned. She didn't flinch. Her eyes went to me. I could see her trying to decide whether she was allowed to defend me. I forced myself to soften for her, even as my chest felt too tight to breathe fully. Sweetheart, I said, go finish your homework in your room. She hesitated, then stood slowly. At the doorway, she turned back. Her voice dropped. Mom, don't let them think you're crazy. The door closed behind her. The sound was quiet. It still felt like a slam. Grant stared at the hallway for a moment, then looked back at me. You're poisoning her against me. The accusation was clean, so backward I almost laughed. I'm not poisoning her, I said. She's watching, that's all. Grant's jaw tightened. You want to know what's happening? Fine. Diane and I are managing the estate plan so it's protected, so it stays in the family. End of story. In the family, I repeated. He stepped closer. His voice lowered, almost soothing, almost intimate. Your family. You're just not thinking clearly. There it was again, not thinking clearly, overthinking, spiraling, all the same message wrapped in different ribbons. I looked at him for a long moment, and something settled inside me, heavy and calm. I didn't argue, I didn't plead. I simply turned and walked to the bedroom. I pulled out a small folder from the back of my closet, the one I used for tax documents and insurance forms. I sat on the floor and started making copies. Bank letters, screenshots, the finance email about the third-party review, the note from Ron that said conflict of interest, the only proof I had that my private life had now reached into my professional. My phone buzzed. Grant knocked once, then opened the door. What are you doing? He asked. I kept my eyes on the papers. Organizing. For what? I paused, choosing words that wouldn't give him something to twist. For clarity, I said. He stood there, then let out a breath that sounded like irritation trying to wear the mask of patience. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. I didn't look up. I'm making it real. When he left, I waited until the house was quiet again. Then I took my phone into the bathroom, turned on the fan, and locked the door, the way you do when you finally accept you can't trust the walls. I searched for an attorney recommended by Marisol, someone who handled family and estate disputes, someone not
connected to Diane's social circle, someone with no reason to protect Grant. I found a name, Kendra Wexler, family and estate law, independent practice, reviews that mentioned calm advice and hard boundaries. My thumb hovered over the call button. My heart pounded, not from fear of law, but from fear of admitting what this was becoming. I pressed call. A receptionist answered, professional and warm. I asked for a consultation. She offered a time later in the week. Before I could lose courage, I said, I need to ask one question now, even if it is just a preliminary one. There was a pause. Then a voice came on the line, measured and direct. Kendra. This is Kendra. Tell me what is going on. I swallowed, feeling the weight of everything I had not said out loud. My husband and his mother changed the trust, I said. I lost access to accounts. My job just removed me from a project due to conflict of interest tied to them. I have documents, but not all of them. I need to understand something. Kendra's voice stayed even. What do you need to know? I closed my eyes, and for the first time since New Year's Eve, I let myself admit the question that had been sitting in my chest like a stone. How exposed am I legally? Chapter 4. When polite rooms turn cold. Enough did not mean safe. It only meant I could breathe without begging anyone to hand me air. Kendra Wexler met me 2 days later in a small office above a dry cleaner in downtown Doylestown, the kind of place that did not try to impress you. Her waiting room had beige walls, a water cooler that hummed, and a bowl of peppermints that looked like it had been there since the 90s. I liked it immediately. No illusions, no performance. She listened without interrupting while I laid everything out. The missing account access, the opened bank mail, the trust language from 2019, the conflict of interest removal at Harborline, the new third-party review, the way Diane spoke for Grant as if she had inherited my voice along with her own. When I finished, she did not say I was overthinking. She did not tell me to calm down. She asked for specifics. Do you have copies of the trust amendment? Only fragments and one signature page. Do you have proof you lost access to accounts? Screenshots and the bank letter. Do you have the email from your company about the conflict of interest? Yes. Kendra nodded once, the motion tight and decisive. Here is the truth. You are not crazy. You are not imagining it. But you need to stop treating this like a marriage problem. This is a legal and financial structure problem. My chest tightened, not from fear this time, but from recognition. What do I do? I asked. You stop talking without counsel present, she said, and you stop accepting informal explanations. You request the full trust documents in writing. You document every interaction. You do not accuse them of anything you cannot prove. That is how you stay safe. Safe. I had not realized how long it had been since I felt safe. Then she leaned forward, hands folded on her desk. And Tessa, because your job already flagged a conflict, we need to assume you could be used as an exposure point, not because you did anything wrong, because they can claim you knew things you did not know. My stomach dropped. So my name could end up attached to this? I said. It already is, she said calmly. We just have to keep it from becoming a noose. On the drive home, I kept both hands on the wheel and stared straight ahead. The road was wet from a morning drizzle, gray sky pressing low. I did not cry. I felt too focused to cry. The tears would come later when focus stopped doing its job. That evening, Grant was in the kitchen again, as if food was his preferred language for avoiding accountability. Sophie was at the table, reading, but her eyes kept lifting, tracking us. Grant looked up with a practiced smile. How was your day? I set my bag down slowly. I met with an attorney. The smile slipped, just a fraction. Why? He asked, voice careful. Because I need the full trust documents, and because Harborline removed me from Port West due to a conflict tied to our household. My attorney says I need to protect myself. Grant's nostrils flared. You went behind my back. I went around a wall you built, I said. Sophie's book lowered an inch. She did not pretend not to listen. Grant stared at me, and for a moment I saw anger, real anger. Then it smoothed out again, replaced by that same controlled tone, the one that always made me feel like I was the unreasonable one. This is extreme, he said. You are escalating. No, I said. I am documenting. He turned his head slightly, as if trying to find the right angle to make me feel ashamed. My mother is going to be furious. I waited. The silence between us filled with everything I was no longer willing to carry. Tell her to talk to my attorney, I said. Grant laughed once, sharp. You think you can bring lawyers into family business. I looked at Sophie, then back at him. You already did, you just forgot to tell me. That night, Diane called. I let it ring out. Then it rang again. Then a third time. Finally, I answered, not because I wanted to, but because I needed the pattern on record. "Tessa," Diane said, voice sweet in the way sugar is sweet before it turns bitter. "I heard Grant tells me you hired a lawyer." "I consulted one," I said. "Why would you do that?" she asked, and I could hear the insult hiding behind the question. "We are family." I stared at the dark window above the sink, my reflection faint in the glass. "Then you should have included me." A pause. Then her voice cooled. "You always take things personally." "I am taking my life personally," I said. Diane exhaled. "Fine, if you want to make this formal, we can meet. We can clear up your confusion." Confusion. The word was a small blade. "I will meet, with counsel present." The next day, Kendra emailed me a short list of things to bring and a longer list of things not to do. Do not argue, do not react, do not improvise. Let the paper speak. Let the structure speak. Let your calm be the loudest thing in the room. The meeting was set Saturday afternoon in a conference room in a local real estate office Diane's friend owned. Neutral ground, she called it. It did not feel neutral when I walked in and saw Diane already seated at the long table, posture perfect, hands folded, eyes fixed on the door as if she had been waiting to judge me. Grant stood behind her, one hand on the back of her chair. Frank sat at the far end, shoulders rounded, gaze drifting toward the window and then away. He looked older than he had a month ago, or maybe I was just seeing him without the haze of wanting his approval. On Diane's side of the table sat a man in a gray suit, his legal pad open, pen ready, opposing counsel. He rose halfway when Kendra and I entered, then sat before I fully reached the chair. Kendra placed a slim folder on the table and looked around the room like she was taking inventory. "Good afternoon," she said. Diane's smile did not reach her eyes. "This feels unnecessary." Kendra's voice stayed flat. It would have been unnecessary if my client had been informed. Grant leaned forward. "We're not doing this," he said. "We're just talking." Kendra did not glance at him. "We are doing this, because your household decisions have created professional exposure for my client." The opposing attorney cleared his throat. "Let us keep this focused. Mrs. Rowan wants access restored and clarity on the estate plan, correct?" I nodded once. I kept my hands folded in my lap so no one could see how tight my fingers were. Diane looked at Grant as if she was asking permission to speak, then addressed me without looking at me. "Tessa, the trust is to protect the family assets." Kendra opened her folder. She slid a printed email across the table, Ron Haskins' note about conflict of interest, then another, the corporate finance message about third-party review, then a screenshot of my banking app denying access. This is what protection looks like from her side. Her employer removed her from a major partnership because of perceived entanglement. If a compliance review expands, her name becomes the easiest place to hang responsibility. That is not protection. That is risk transfer. Grant's face tightened. "That's ridiculous." Kendra's eyes finally lifted to him. "Is it? Your household is connected to an investment group tied to PortWest. Your wife is the compliance professional in that partnership. If she is excluded from decision-making at home and then blamed at work, she's exposed on both ends." Diane's lips pressed into a thin line. "This is unbelievable. I have never seen such mistrust." I finally lifted my eyes to her. My voice was quiet. "I have never seen such silence." For a moment, the room held its breath. Then Grant leaned toward me, his voice low, as if he could still pull me back into the old pattern. "Tessa, stop. You are making my mother out to be a villain." I looked at him, and something inside me settled into place with a calm I didn't recognize. "I am not making anyone anything. I am responding to what you chose." Kendra closed her folder. "Here is what will happen. You will provide the full trust documents within 10 business days, all amendments, all schedules, all beneficiary designations, and the list of authorized signers. My client will have restored access to any accounts that contain marital funds or funds earmarked for the minor child. If you refuse, we will proceed with formal requests and protective filings. The opposing attorney opened his mouth, then closed it again. Diane's eyes flicked to Grant, then back to her. Frank stared at the table like it might crack open and swallow him. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I simply spoke the line Kendra and I had agreed on in the car on the way there, the line that turned my boundaries into a door that locked. From now on, everything goes through counsel. Grant stared at me, and for a moment he looked like he didn't recognize the person sitting across from him. The meeting ended the way it began, polite on the surface, cold underneath. There were no apologies, no hugs, no promises to do better, just clipped agreements and tense silence. On the walk to the parking lot, the air felt sharper than it had on the way in. Kendra touched my elbow lightly. "You did well," she said. "You did not give them anything emotional to use." I nodded. My hands were trembling now that the room was behind me, but I kept them in my coat pockets. When I got home, Sophie was on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, pretending to watch a show she was not watching. She looked up as I entered, eyes searching my face. "How bad was it?" she asked. I sat beside her, close enough to feel her warmth. "It was quiet," I said. "That is what makes it bad." She swallowed. "Are we okay?" I looked at my daughter, and the answer that rose in my chest was not clean or simple, but it was true. "We are starting to be," I said. Later that night, after Sophie went to bed, I stood at the kitchen window and watched the streetlights glow against the wet pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn sounded, low and lonely. My phone buzzed with a new email from corporate finance. Third-party review confirmed. External consultant scheduled. I did not open it right away. I just held the phone and breathed, feeling the cold certainty settle deeper. The consequences were no longer theoretical. They were moving now, quietly, officially, and I knew, in the same steady way I knew winter would not lift overnight, that whatever came next had already started. Chapter 5. What survived after everything fell. Because I stopped holding it together, everything else finally moved. The audit began quietly, the way real consequences always do. No announcements, no dramatic emails, just a calendar hold marked external review and a short list of requests that landed in my inbox one Tuesday morning while I was eating toast that had gone cold. Harborline did not frame it as an emergency. They framed it as diligence, independent eyes, standard procedure, but I had lived long enough inside systems to recognize the tone shift. This was no longer hypothetical. Within a week, Port West paused. Their lawyers requested additional disclosures. The investment group Grant had brushed off as irrelevant suddenly mattered very much. My name appeared in fewer emails, then more. Not as a lead, not as a scapegoat, but as a reference point. Compliance wanted my input now, carefully, formally, through documented channels. At home, the house grew quieter in a different way. Grant stopped cooking elaborate dinners. He stopped asking how my day was. We moved around each other like colleagues waiting out a notice period. There were no fights. That surprised people later when they asked. They expected yelling. They expected tears. What they did not understand was that the fight had already happened, and it had ended the moment I stopped trying to be understood. The bank was next. I learned about the refinance delay through a notification, not a phone call. The lender flagged unresolved governance issues. They wanted clarity on beneficial ownership. They wanted assurance that the trust structure did not create undue risk. Words like deferred and pending appeared where approved used to be.
Grant came home early that day, jacket still on, keys set down harder than necessary. "They froze the refinance," he said. I nodded. "That happens during reviews." "They cited exposure," he said, watching my face. I met his gaze. "They should." He laughed, short and bitter. "You enjoy this." I did not raise my voice. "No, I am not enjoying anything. I am watching consequences arrive." For the first time, he looked tired. Not irritated, not superior, just tired. He sat at the table and rubbed his hands together like he was trying to warm them. "My bonus is on hold," he said. "They are reevaluating my role." I said nothing, not because I wanted him to suffer, but because there was nothing left to explain. He had lived in a world where decisions were invisible until they touched him. Now they were touching him. The divorce paperwork took less drama than our wedding had. We hired mediators, we divided things carefully. No grand statements, no accusations that could not be backed by documents. Sophie stayed with me most nights. That was not contested. Grant did not fight it. In some quiet way, I think he knew that part had already been decided by the way she stopped looking at him for reassurance. We signed in a beige office that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. The mediator spoke in neutral tones about schedules and assets and future communication. Grant signed quickly. I signed slowly, reading every page, not because I distrusted the process, but because I no longer rushed through things that determined my life. When it was over, Grant stood up first. He hesitated, then said, "I never meant to hurt you." I believed that, which did not change anything. "I know," I said, "but you let it happen." He nodded once, then left. The house felt larger after that, not emptier, just quieter in a way that allowed sound to return. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock in the hallway, Sophie's music drifting from her room, not muffled anymore. One evening, a few weeks later, we sat on the couch folding laundry. It was an ordinary task, socks and sweaters and the steady rhythm of hands moving together. Sophie held up one of my shirts and smiled. "You feel lighter," she said. I looked at her. "Do I?" She nodded, matter of fact. "You do not look like you are bracing anymore." The word landed gently. Bracing. I had not realized how long I had been doing that, how my body had learned to prepare for impact even in rooms that claimed to love me. "That's good," I said. She folded the shirt and placed it in the pile. "It is." At work, the audit concluded the way audits usually do, with findings, with recommendations, and a quiet reshuffling of authority. No one was fired publicly, no one was dragged through headlines, but roles changed. Oversight tightened. Harbor Line asked me to consult on remediation, carefully, with clear boundaries. I agreed, on my terms. Grant took a leave of absence. His position was not eliminated, but it was diminished. Risk exposure does not scream, it narrows. Diane stopped calling. Once, she sent a message that said she hoped Sophie was well. I replied that Sophie was fine, and that any future communication should go through counsel. She did not respond. Frank mailed a birthday card for Sophie. There was no return address, just his handwriting, smaller than I remembered. I did not feel victorious. That surprised me too. I felt settled. The difference mattered. On a rainy Sunday afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and reread the earliest notes I had taken back in January. Screenshots, dates, words like authorized and handled and overthinking. I realized something then that I had not let myself see before. I did not win anything. I stopped losing myself. The story people wanted to tell was simpler. Woman exposes betrayal, family collapses, justice served. That was not what happened. What happened was quieter. A woman noticed she was being erased and decided not to assist in her own disappearance. If there's anything I learned, it's this. Silence can be a wound, or it can be a boundary. The difference is choice. For years, my silence had been the kind that shrinks you, the kind that keeps rooms comfortable at your expense. When I stopped explaining myself, stopped smoothing over gaps, stopped asking permission to see my own life clearly, that silence changed shape. It became space. The last email from Harborline's finance team arrived on a Friday afternoon. Audit closed, controls updated. Thank you for your cooperation. I closed my laptop and went outside. The air smelled like wet leaves and early spring. Sophie was in the yard throwing a tennis ball for the neighbor's dog, laughing when it refused to bring it back. I stood there for a moment, hands in my pockets, and let myself feel the end of something. Not the end of pain, the end of confusion. That night, after Sophie went to bed, I sat alone on the couch and thought about the question Kendra asked me in that beige office weeks ago. What do you need to feel safe? At the time, I did not know. Now, I did. I needed my voice back. Not loud, not angry, just present. If you're still reading this, still listening, maybe it's because something in your life feels off in the same quiet way. Maybe you've been told you're overthinking when you're actually noticing. Maybe your silence has been mistaken for consent. So I'll ask you the question I learned to ask myself, not as an accusation, but as an invitation. Are you quiet because you choose peace, or because someone taught you that speaking would cost too much? If this story stayed with you, if it made you pause, I hope you stay a little longer. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is recognize ourselves in someone else and decide, gently, to stop disappearing.